I'm going to start off with a caveat. I am not a statistician. I'm just a reasonably educated person with multiple college degrees who studied like sociology, anthropology, and all these other things. And as a result of studying these things, I also had to do my own little individual studies, in order to get my degrees. So I have slightly better understanding than the average individual of how to read studies and how to interpret data. I am not going to sit here and say that everything is going to be 100% accurate because a lot of this stuff is from a long ass time ago. And I'm going to be honest with you, I am not going to be doing a whole lot of digging. But I'm putting that caveat out there just so that you know. Because I'm sure there will be other people who have a better understanding of this study than I do, who are going to interpret this data. Now, here's a tweet. The cesspool that is Twitter. Black doctors are literally murdering black babies. That's the quote. Then you ask yourself, well, what the hell's going on? Let's read this one. Batshit insane. 2020 paper accusing white doctors of spontaneous bias with so-called 50% drop in mortality gap under black physicians was bullshit. That's not true. Results zeroed out when controlling for very low birth weights. But they also cut a key data point. They didn't. Because we're going to go over this. They did not cut it. It's actually still in the fucking paper if you know how to read it. According to the FOIA request, white newborns face 80 more deaths per 100,000 births with black physician than a white one, suggesting a 22% drop in fatality because in concordance, and they're arguing that they removed it because it undermines the narrative. Now, they give you a bunch of different graphs that don't really mean shit because they just grab graphs. Now, my initial brain said to myself, why would you want to zero out low birth weight? That doesn't make sense because if the idea is about doctors and pregnant women and racial concordance, that's the phrase, racial concordance, and black physicians having better results or racial concordance with black female mothers, right? My assumption is that, well, more than likely that black physician has been her physician since inception, or at least since the beginnings of her pregnancy, right? And birth weight, not accounting for like random diseases and, genetic variations and that and all of that, are more than likely influenced by the health of the mother, right? And if the health of the mother is better under black physicians, why would you get rid of low birth weight? That doesn't make sense to me. That's what I'm thinking, right? Black physicians have black female patients. They are likely taking better care of those black female patients, which results in a higher birth weight and better infant success. That's what I think. But then let me actually go to their fucking document and read it. So when you go to the Daily Caller, they just dump you into this document. Now, we're going to go through all of the emails and we're going to go to that section so we can read it. Now, this is an email chain. The chain starts on February 15th. Well, actually, it starts down here, on which they're talking about trying to get a meeting together. So I'm skipping all of this because this is the most pertinent part, in which they say, good news, I caught my obligatory coding error, updated results attached. Bad news, results are not as strong. We lose the effect when a physician-fixed effect is included for newborns. Most things keep clear in the black-white subsamples, though. Now edit. Now, there are this thing called physician-fixed that they're talking about. Okay? And we're going to define that soon. General news. I think there's enough to tell a story here. Some of the results suggest that there is a selection issue on the part of the mothers, although I can't quite put my thumb on it. Why, as I read the results? I don't trust all the stars, though, in every location. Aaron responds and says, in the newborn models, there are 1.9 million or so observations, but the sum in the black doc, white doc models is smaller. Why? Are there other race ethnicities docs? If so, should we drop them? So they're talking about their data set, whether or not they should drop certain data points, add certain data points. Brad responds, good eyes. There shouldn't be. I've been keeping everyone out that doesn't belong with a flag below. I will delete them and replicate the estimates this morning. And then he goes through whatever code that he wrote. A few hours later, after he went through all his calculations, he says, okay, it took futzing with models for most of the day, but I figured it out. There were a few physicians that ended up being double coded. Once I omit them, it zeroes out. Just kicked off regressions. They should be ready in the morning. So in regards to the physician fixed effect, they were double coding, or likely had it looks like they had duplicate data, which was influencing their data set. And once he got rid of them, whatever bad news he saw about the results went away. That's effectively what he's saying here. Okay, cool. So that's that email chain. Let's go on to the next email chain. Starts right here, in which Aaron says, I was talking with a health economist about it, and he asked 2 questions. We're going to start with question 1, and then we're going to go back to question 2. Question 1, can we include patient-fixed effects for the moms? And when he says patient fixed, this is what he means. That is, can we see the same mom coming back from multiple births? Same mom coming back from multiple births. I'm assuming this is to the same doctor. Or compare survival across siblings. I don't think so, but I want to ask you, Brad. And his response is negative. We have no patient identifier, although I think I can infer if this is the first or second birth based on the ICD-9s. So there's no patient fixed effect, i.e. the same mother coming back, I'm assuming to the same doctor for multiple births, because there's no patient identifier. Although he's saying that if you want to, we can infer it, but it's not included. And then he says, don't worry about that. He wanted us to include a patient fixed effect, but we can't. So the patient fixed effect is thrown out, according to this one, right? Question 2, when discussing possible mechanisms, he asked whether there is an effect on birth weight, and I would add gestational age. I said that this is conditional on the hospital stay, when giving birth, so there's not much scope for affecting these at this point. He suspected that the patient-physician relationships might predate birth, and we might see legitimate good effect on it. Alternatively, seeing nothing could be interpreted as evidence against selection or placebo. These competing interpretations make it a bit dicey. And his response to question 2 was, we do have controls for low weight and early term in the estimations. So early terms are the kids who are born early. So they are controlling for low weight. Now, they want to zero out those results, but they're not zeroing out the results, but they are controlling for low weight and births that are occurring before they go to full term. So births that are occurring at 37 weeks or whatever, right? Okay. Which again would also likely result in low weight. So the argument about low weight is already being controlled for. And they're saying that in this email. He also asks, do you want me to split based on these? And he says no. The idea would be to use them as outcomes rather than controls, but I'm not sure we will want to go down that road. So they don't want to use the low birth weight as outcomes, but they are using them as controls. So they are controlling for that in this data set, but they're not going to use that as an outcome when it comes to this whole patient, black physician with a black patient connection that they're trying to create. That's what I'm reading when I'm reading this. It could be a mechanism, but it requires that the baby's doctor, not the mom's doctor, exerts some influence during the pregnancy. Given that we think the mother's doctor is more important prenatally than the baby's, i.e. the doctor that's actually taking care of the mother, which is in line with what I was thinking, not the doctor giving birth to the baby. No, they're not talking about that doctor. They're talking about the doctor that is actually taking care of the mother. They think that the doctor that is taking care of the mother prenatally is more important than the doctor that's pulling the baby out of the mother. So given that we think the mother's doctor is more important prenatally than the baby's, it would be more informative if we could see the effect of the mother's doctor's race on childbirth weight and gestation. But this is not possible, I think. So they're thinking about it, but given their data set, they don't think it's possible. So they don't want to put it in the outcomes, but they are controlling for that in their data set. They're not getting rid of it, but they are controlling for it. But these white people want to get rid of it entirely, which makes no sense to get rid of it entirely. But they also don't want it to fuck up the data. Okay, cool. So Aaron says, our current mortality rate, which combines births and deaths after live birth, is not directly comparable to standard mortality rates, which exclude all stillbirths, but look at all-cause mortality in the first year of life. Brad says it's impossible to construct measures of stillbirth rate and of in-hospital mortality rates conditional on live birth, which would allow us to say what share of conventional infant mortality rates are due to in-hospital mortality. This seems like it should be known already. Does anyone know? As is much known about stillbirth rates and racial disparities. In any case, we should more carefully relate our measure to conventional measures. The question is, can we learn anything by looking at if the race concordance effect shows up all on the stillbirth rate, all on the post-live birth rate, or equally between them, if anything, with that information which we can estimate reveals something new. So here they're discussing their mortality rate and how it relates to standard mortality rates, and standard mortality rates do not include stillbirths. Now they're arguing whether or not they could use it because it could be helpful in deciding what share of conventional infant mortality is due to in-hospital mortality. So the hospital becomes important here. But they're just trying to figure out whether or not we can do that. And then Brad says, first, apologies for some confusion. We do not have stillborns in the current data set. So that's out. So their current data set does not include stillborns. He's already saying that. In order to get into the sample, the AHCA has to code the newborn's priority admission as for newborn baby born within the facility, This basically, he's trying to say that in order for them to get into the sample, they have to have a certain code. We do have stillborns in the overall set of data, which we could exploit, possibly a bad word choice, if we want. I can pull this information and data if you guys believe it's prudent. It might take a while, but it's there. So while they have stillborns in the overall data set, they took them out. And he's saying, hey, if you want me to do the calculations, I can do the calculations. And then he responds, I think it's less necessary now. As long as we are only looking at live births, that's fine. It's good to have that clarified. So they're only looking at live births. They're not talking about stillborn births at all. By my rough calculations, this in-hospital mortality rate is over half of current infant mortality, i.e. all-cause first year. So the in-hospital mortality rate is half of the infant mortality. So out of all the causes for infant mortality, in-hospital mortality rate accounts for half of infant mortality. I guess it's an open question whether looking at stillborn rates could provide additional insight. I'm not sure on that. So let's recap. When it came to a fixed physician, or the physician fixed effect, as they say right here, they found out that their data set included duplicate information, and so they omitted that and took it out, as they should have. Okay, cool. So that's what that email says. This email talks about a patient fixed effect. So instead of the physician being fixed, we're now talking about the patient being fixed, in which we're only looking at the patient. So if the physician fixed effect is about the physician being the same, now we're looking at the patient fixed effect in which the patient stays the same, i.e. the same mom coming back from multiple births. Again, I don't know if this is going to the same doctor or not, But that's what they're talking about here, the patient fixed effect. And during this entire exchange, they decided to not include that because they don't have the patient identifier. And in order to do that, they have to infer it from the data, but it wouldn't be explicit in the data. So that's why it's not there. So there's no fixed patient effect. The other thing that they said in this thing was that birth weight has already been controlled for. So they already have controls for low weight and early term births, i.e. babies that are born early, okay? Now they want to decide if they should use that for outcomes, but that's part of the discussion. But as of right now, what they're saying is that they are controlling for low birth weight or babies that are born early. We got that. Next, we're talking about stillbirths, and they're also discussing in-hospital mortality. And what we learn is that while they have stillbirths in the data set, they took it out. And so they're not going to include it, and that they're only going to look at live births. And that according to their calculations, at least in this email, in-hospital mortality accounts for over half of the current infant mortality. So out of all the reasons that an infant dies, in-hospital mortality accounts for over half of that. Keep that in mind. Okay, now let's move on down to the thing that they're talking about, which is so egregious in their minds, right? They're trying to say that they took this data out because it goes against the narrative. First of all, they didn't actually take it out. This sentence is effectively duplicate information. It's just more explicit information that gives you the actual numbers associated with this phenomenon. So we're talking about the Black physician coefficient. We're going to read it the whole thing. The simplest descriptive model of the relationship between physician race and Black-white infant mortality gap, absent controls, the patient Black coefficient estimates that under the care of white physicians, Black newborns experience triple the in-hospital mortality rate of white infants. White newborns rate is 290, Black newborns rate is 894. And then this is just telling you how many deaths per 100,000, okay? Estimates of the Black physician coefficient imply little consistent evidence of a difference in performance across white and Black physicians for white newborns. So it implies little consistent evidence. There is evidence, but it's not very consistent when we're talking about the performance of white and Black physicians for white newborns. Although minor evidence of racial concordance appears for white newborns once hospital fixed effects are applied. So they do tell you in that sentence that there is racial concordance for white newborns when they're under the care of white physicians, i.e. their live birth rates are better under white physicians once you take into account hospital fixed effects. So while they're trying to say that they scrubbed the data, they got rid of the explicit numbers. Because more than likely, what they would have done and what they're doing now is they're trying to say, hey, they would only focus in on this one sentence to try to negate the entire narrative that we're talking about in this paper. Because when they crunched the data, they saw some weird shit. And they saw a huge difference in Black infant mortality when under the care of a Black physician. But they are telling you that while the evidence isn't consistent, they did notice that there was some racial concordance for white newborns when under the care of white physicians once we take into account hospital fixed effects. So once we keep the hospital fixed, we do see a difference. So let's go to column 4 of table 1. And as you can see, it's right here. We have Black physician, Black patient, and then Black physician with a Black patient. When we're looking at all-cause death, Black physicians are in the negative when it comes to all-cause death amongst infants with no fixed variables. Black physicians are still in the negative when you account for fixed variables for insurance and comorbidity. Black physicians go in the positive when we start taking into account time, but that's a slight increase. And then it goes up for all-cause death once we take into account the hospital location. Same thing here. We're looking at the Black patient. Mortality goes up. This is a positive number, so it's bad. It's not negative. Even when we take into account insurance and comorbidity fixed rates, it is still positive. Even when we take into account time, it's still positive. It goes up slightly, but it's still positive. But once we take into account the hospital fix for whatever, it goes down. So there is improvement, but it's still bad because it's still positive, right? But we're talking about the Black physicians because that's what they want to focus on. So as we can see, it's negative, negative, then it goes up slightly when talking about fixed time, and then it goes up slightly when we're talking about the hospital being fixed. Now, let's think about this. If white infant mortality goes up with a white physician when we apply the hospital being fixed, it does not mean that Black physicians are killing white newborns. That's not what that means. Hospitals are in certain locations, correct? What do we know racially about America, whether we want to acknowledge it or not? White people have a tendency to go to areas where there are mostly other white people. And white people, because they tend to earn more compared to their Black counterparts, tend to have more money. So their hospitals likely have more money. So it would make sense that you would see a slight increase or some minor evidence of racial concordance for white newborns with white physicians where we're talking about hospital fixed hospital effects. In fact, they talked about it in the email that the hospital does have an effect on infant mortality. White people tend to hang around other white people. White people, on average, have more wealth, have more access to capital, have more money than black people. Therefore, their hospitals are likely better funded. Therefore, you're gonna see an increase in white newborn births with white physicians. That makes sense. Now, let's think about it. If you are a white person who doesn't have a lot of money, chances are you're not living around a bunch of other white people. Chances are you're probably living in this case, a black area. Black people and those areas with majority black tend to have less money, less capital, less wealth. That means that the hospitals are likely less funded. And if the hospitals don't have funding and the email told you that the hospital stay affects infant mortality, yeah, you're probably going to see slightly more deaths of white infants when you account for that hospital being fixed. It's not about the physician. It's about the hospital. That's where the change occurs. As you can see in the fucking data, it's negative. Insurance gets fixed. It stays negative for black physicians. You add in this thing called time. So I'm guessing when the baby's born, it goes up slightly. And then when you add in the hospital, it goes up even more. So one, black physicians aren't killing white babies, you dumbasses. That's not what the data is saying. They did control for low birth weight, and they also controlled for children that are born earlier, which also is going to affect birth weight. So they did control for that. They didn't eliminate for it. They just controlled for it. It doesn't make sense to eliminate that data because birth weight is likely going to be influenced by the mother's doctor, not the doctor who's pulling the baby out the mama, by the mother's doctor. If the mother has a black doctor, they're likely giving them better care. They're likely in better health. And if the mother is in better health, the baby's going to be in better health. But even with all that being said, they did control for the low birth weight. It doesn't make sense to get rid of it. And this notion that they somehow eliminated a data point because it was inconvenient, no. The data point is still there. And you can see it in the previous sentence because it says the same shit. And you can also see it in the fucking data. They didn't get rid of it. They just got rid of this explicitly. Probably because they understand how some of you goofballs are going to take this and try to make this the entire fucking article and ignore everything else that it was saying. Just like you fucking did. Went ahead and got the AI summary. And as you can see, they're talking about racial concordance, right? And they're talking about the counter studies. And they're saying that studies controlling for hospital and physician fixed effects, controlling for inherent hospital doctor traits, and critical factors like very low birth weight show racial concordance effect on newborn mortality became near zero, statistically insignificant. Now, this is what they're saying the counter studies are finding. Let me look at actually what they're basically just referencing that Daily Caller thing. Because it looks like all these other studies significant. Maybe this was the counter study. Is this the counter study? Findings suggest careful by strikingly, these effects appear to manifest more strongly in complicated cases when hospitals deliver more black newborns. No such concordant effect is found among birthing mothers. So this is not a counter study. We posit these differences may be ameliorated by racial concordance. So this is not a counter study. That's not a counter study. It doesn't seem any of these are counter studies. It seems the only counter study is that Daily Caller article. So I don't even know if this is not a counter study either. Because these are other studies that are reinforcing the original study. Like, what are we talking about? The only counter study they have is this fucking Daily Caller article. And it's not a counter study. It's just bad analysis of the original study. So what the fuck are they talking about, counter study? Okay, here's one. We find, so here is one counter study. We explore concordance in a setting where racial disparities are particularly severe. Results examining 1.8 million hospital births in the state of Florida between 1992 and 2015 suggest that newborn physician racial concordance is associated with significant improvement in mortality for black infants. Results further suggest that these benefits manifest during more challenging births in hospitals that deliver more black babies, likely because they're in majority black areas. And we find no significant improvement in maternal mortality when birthing mothers share race with their physician. So we do have one counter study. So I found it. Here it is. It seems like it's coming to the same conclusion. Like, what are you talking about? As can be seen here, the benefits of concordance only manifest in hospital quarters with a greater number of black infants born. However, as can be seen in columns 3 and 8, the mortality penalty for black newborns treated by white physicians is 56% larger in hospitals managing a large number of black newborns. This suggests, all else equal, that black physicians are not performing better as the number of black newborns increases. Instead, it appears that white physicians are underperforming. And then it says, they tried to replicate the analysis by splitting on the number of white newborns delivered in a hospital quarter. Results indicate that concordance benefits manifest for black newborns regardless of the number of white or other children born in the hospital. In other words, the concordance benefit varies with the hospital's level of experience caring for black newborns, not with the white newborns or newborns in general. In hospital quarters with large number of black newborns, those born under the care of white physicians experience high mortality penalties. How is this? This is not a counter, so I guess they're basically trying to say that it's about whether or not the hospital has experience taking care of large numbers of black newborns, but that even in those instances, for whatever reason, their white counterparts are underperforming. It's not that black physicians are overperforming, it's that their white counterparts are underperforming. So the previous research was about prenatal care, because that's what their focus was on, and that's what their data showed. But I guess their data is more focused around the hospital in which the baby is born, which is likely indicative of the fact that the hospital either has more resources or less resources, which is likely linked to racial disparities. Like, it's all, so effectively it's the same shit. I don't know why they're trying to argue in this AI summary that there are counter studies, because when you look at the fucking evidence, even the one counter study they have, it's not really arguing difference. Like, it's still arguing that there are racial disparities. But instead of arguing that the racial disparity is about the physician taking care of the maternal mother, thereby increasing the odds that her baby is going to have better outcomes, their argument is that the racial disparity is with the hospital, which also seems to be what the original study also showed when they were talking about the hospital being fixed and white newborns having better outcomes with white doctors. Those hospitals are likely in majority white areas where you have a lot of white newborns being born, and majority white areas, majority white doctors, majority white newborns. So yeah, they're going to have better outcomes, as opposed to a white newborn that's born in an area where you have majority black patients. If the white infant is having bad outcomes, it's not because of the black physician that's performing at a base level, because according to that study, the black physicians weren't overperforming the white physicians. The white physicians were underperforming in relation to the black physicians. So it's not that the white infants are having worse outcomes in these majority black areas because of black physicians. It's likely they're having worse outcomes because of the fucking hospital.